Welcome to Older Military's Radio TV, and we're lifelong Catholics, and what we do is all for free, and for the love of Jesus Christ, and for our Holy Mother, the Church. We'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. And today we're going to start checking on about what is going on in London with Agent Sniper. This is part one of this. More than 30 years, number 54 Broadway had been the headquarters of the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, the agency charged with overseas espionage and counter-espionage, but which did not officially exist. The brass plate was a simple yet remarkable, effective means of disguising the presence of Britain's premier spies working within the building. That morning in April 1959, however, the small group of middle-aged men gathered in a fourth-floor conference room might have benefited from the products purveyed by the purported occupants of the premises. The assembled company were all senior officers in three of the West's most powerful and important bulwarks against Soviet bloc espionage: MI6, MI5, and the CIA. They were also notionally at least allies in the fight against Moscow's spy masters, but the relationship that each had established with the others during World War II had been beset by tension and acrimony for almost a decade. That spring morning, the American representative added accelerant to an already combustible situation. Sniper says Russians have got two very important spies in Britain, one in British intelligence, the other somewhere in the Navy. Howard Rollman bluntly informed the counterparts before alerting them to the existence and presumed background of the CIA source. He is almost certainly in the UB, his German's off, and the Polish stuff is grade 1 from the inside. The revelation was the last news either of the British services needed. The defections in May 1951 of Guy Burgess and Donald McLean, both Foreign Office officials. In a Burgess case, a former agent of MI6, that caused the rift between U.S. and British intelligence, one which forced MI5's then Director General, Sir Percy Soto, to make a transatlantic bid to appease his American counterparts in the FBI. As the official history of the Security Service records, he was not entirely successful. Soto flew to Washington to brief in an attempt to mollify the irascible J. Edgar Hoover in person, as well as undertaking the difficult task of trying to reassure the skeptical Hoover about the current state of British security. He quickly found himself caught in a crossfire between the Bureau and the CIA. At least part of the crossfire involved a third British spy, Harold Kim Philby. As a senior MI6 officer during World War II, he had taken James Ingleton under his wing, and in post-war Washington, tutored him in the arts of counterintelligence in turn. Ingleton viewed Philby as a close friend and had trusted him with details of CIA operations. But investigations by MI5 had convinced the security service that Philby was a traitor, a KGB mole within British intelligence, that he had given Burgess and McLean the tip-off, which enabled them to escape to Moscow. Although he had been allowed to resign from MI6, his treachery was an open secret. In London and in Washington, it was a festering sore between Hoover and Ingleton, and between American and British intelligence. In October 1955, the fault line became public and unavoidable. At Hoover's instigation, the New York Sunday News named Fibley as the third man in Britain's growing spy scandal. And on October 25th, the Labour MP Marcus Lipton put the government on the spot in Parliament. Has the Prime Minister made up his mind to cover up all costs the dubious third man activities of Mr. Harold Fibley, who was first secretary at the Washington Embassy a little time ago? And he determined to strife all discussion on the very great matters which is an insult to the intelligence of the country. So James Jesus Engleton was trained by a KGB spy. And traded to the ground. Roman told the meeting that Sniper had reported on discussions with his colleagues in the KGB. They had shown him top secret documents provided by their moles and British intelligence. The information was fragmentary, and the CIA man made it clear that Ingleton remained profoundly skeptical. Nor could Sniper put names to Moscow's pair of spies inside MI6 in the Navy. For that reason, he had christened the name Lambada 1 and Lambada 2. On Lambada 2, there was very little for MI5 and MI6 to get their teeth into. All Sniper knew was that he had served in Warsaw in 1952. He had been caught by Polish security trading on the black market. He had then blackmailed him into betraying his country. The information on Lambada 1, however, was potentially more helpful. Sniper had shown 3 internal MI6 documents which the mole had sent to his masters in Moscow. One of the excerpts from the R6, the annual summary of the intelligence, listed country by country which MI6 circulated to its offices worldwide. Sniper had seen the section covering Poland. The second was the position of RB, a parallel report sent out from London, which summarized the latest scientific and technical innovations as well as the use by the SIS in overseas operation. The third document, the watch list, was the most sensitive of all. It identified Polish citizens that MI6 Warsaw station had targeted for recruitment. The triangulation of these 3 documents meant, in theory, that MI6 would be able to come up with a list of possible moles, working out which its officers had access to. All of them should have made the job of identifying suspects relatively straightforward. The task was handed to the head of counterintelligence, Taras Slicky, a 13-year MI6 veteran. It did not take him long to discover that only 10 SIS officers had ever had access to all the reports, but that the best Lecky could do, as Peter Wright recalled 3 decades later. The records of 10 were investigated, and all were exonerated, including one named George Blake, a rising young MI6 star. Blake, MI5, and MI6 concluded could not possibly be a spy. The best explanation for the leak, in the absence of any credible human candidate, was the burglary of an MI6 safe in Brussels, which had taken place 2 years before. There had indeed been a burglary, or rather a series of burglaries, in the early to mid 1950s. Safes in the secure premises in Warsaw and Gdynia near Gdansk, as well as Brussels, had been raided. But since no one had thought to keep an inventory of what they contained, contemporaries' internal investigation quickly dried up. In autumn 1959, the burglary story was passed back to Washington without further qualifications. Engleton saw it and added it to the growing list of grudges against Sniper. Before long, he, MI6, and MI5 would all have cause to regret their somewhat lackluster collective response to Sniper's warnings. In March 1960, Sniper sent a new report to the CIA's West Berlin dead letter drop, provided far more detailed information on Lombardi 2, including a list of 99 documents the mole had smuggled to Soviet bloc intelligence from January to November 1952. MI5 quickly assessed its own cryptomes to the source. Henceforth, in British intelligence files, Sniper was quoted as Lavina, and as an excerpt in the deleted declassified files show, his new material was remarkably precise. We have recently received from the CIA information from Lavina, which may have a bearing on the leakage from an attaché's office in Warsaw. Lavina reported as follows. In about 1951, an employee of the British Naval Attaché office in Warsaw was recruited. The employee had access to the secret activities and documents of the attaché. The name of the employee was given provisionally by Lavina as Humpkiner or Happenkiner or Humpencourt or some sort. The employee was transferred back to England about the beginning of 1953 and assigned to the Admiralty. Because of this importance, he was then taken over by the KGB and continued to work successfully for the KGB in London. The list of documents Lambda 2 had leaked was particularly troubling. Its index specified that they had been acquired in British embassy by means of agent penetration. It included data on the size and strength of the British and U.S. naval forces. Instructions as to what is needed by the British intelligence on Soviet ports and ports of the people's democracies. Numerous allied military and intelligence reports, and the Admiralty's highly sensitive Manual of Naval Intelligence. MI5 began an urgent review of old case files, and reports emanating from Warsaw. What it had discovered made for grim reading, and was certain to increase American suspicion about the security of British intelligence. In May 1960, MI6 forwarded the preliminary results to Washington. We have now carried out a certain amount of limited investigation on the list of documents provided by Lavina, and have reached, in conjunction with the security services, certain tentative conclusions. Although we have not been able to identify all the documents given in Lavina's list, we believe that these documents could have been in existence at the British Embassy in Warsaw in 1951 and 1952. We also believe that there is another point in Poland or in the UK where all documents could have existed at any time. At one point, we considered that the burglaries which took place in Gdynia from 1955 onwards might have account for the loss of some of the documents. Although our investigations are still continuing, the possibility that these burglaries can account for the loss of documents is rapidly diminishing. Evidence to date indicates that most of them probably never went to Gdynia, and at the time when we had naval attaché office in Warsaw of the autumn 1955, the papers of this office were kept in a registry of strong room shared with military attaché. All of the documents by their nature can have been in possession at some time of the naval attaché or the military attaché, and thus could have been held in joint registry strong room. Right there. We're getting up to the point where we will stop for the moment for the show. So let's finish up here. The key document that one which helped focus on was the Manual on Naval Intelligence. The version which Polish and Soviet intelligence had been given by their spy was dated 1948, but they had also evidently seen a separate chart setting out a plan, but never implemented. Internal reorganization of the Admiralty's Naval Intelligence branch, dated several years later, which was never held in the same location as the other papers. This led to a dull conclusion. We regretfully conclude, therefore, that we have to consider two separate leakage of attaché papers. There was, however, worse to follow. MI5 drew up a list of embassy staff who could have access to the documents and compared them with Sniper's rough approximation of the spy's name. There was no Happerkeener, or Hoppencourt, but there was a Hugoton. It was hardly a match, but the circumstance of the man's career suggested that he was the most likely candidate. Outwardly 55-year-old Harry Frederick Hugoton was a non-descriptive plotter in the low levels of the government service, but his job appearance masked a history of petty criminality, incipient alcoholism, and domestic violence. His flaws and weaknesses made him an easy target for Soviet bloc intelligence, while his mundane position ensured that his country failed to spot the danger he posed. Born in Lincoln, he had left school at 14 and joined the Royal Navy, rising during World War II to the rank of Chief Petty Officer, and assigned the duties of Masters of Arms, a non-commissioned officer responsible for onboard discipline. At the end of the war, he joined the civil service, was assigned to the Department of Naval Intelligence. In July 1951, he was posted as the Admiralty Clerical Officer to the British Embassy in Warsaw, and for a year, he was the only member of the naval attaché staff. His wife, Amy, accompanied him, and the couple lived together in a cheap apartment block. As a British government employee, Hugoton had access to Western goods and produced in a communist society, notably a short on luxuries. He quickly exploited his position to trade on the black market, a dangerous if profitable enterprise, which evidently brought him to the attention of the Polish police. They duly handed him over to the Bezpieczeństwa, or UB, which gave him a stark choice: work undercover for Polish intelligence or face the exposure of criminal activities to the British embassy. Hugoton elected to betray his country. That is the end of part one. Coming up in part two, either tomorrow or Monday, we'll see how the Admiralty did nothing to stop Hugoton, but just kept transferring him to different parts of service where it still had very highly secretive information. And more information will be coming out in part two. So this is Auto Military Radio TV signing off. Yes, folks.